Hey guys, welcome to the Source Gaming Discussion. I am your host, Epic Martin 7, and today we have a brand new special guest who's never been on any of these discussion videos, Mr. Mario.
Hey, what's going on, everyone? It's me, Mr. Mario, and thanks, Epic Martin, for bringing me on here. Admittedly, I don't know too much about the show here, but I've seen you around, of course. Then when you invited me onto this, I was like, you know what? Sure, this sounds fun. Let's give this a shot.
Anyways, so the first thing we're going to talk about today is, of course, the Nintendo Switch, which is Nintendo's latest console. Recently, 5.0 came out with some pretty decent new features. Of course, 5.0.1 recently released, and that was just a stability update, you know, the classic Nintendo. And 5.0 had, initially, some very little new features they added, but there was a lot of work modified beyond the scenes. So I figured right now we're going to kind of ease our way into this, and we can start with what was officially added. Now, technically speaking, this is just going to be a brief overview. We're not going to go over every single new feature, but we're just going to kind of brush over what Nintendo officially added, then get into the fun stuff. So, the first thing they seemed to add was that you can now add friends from Facebook and Twitter. Now, what do you think about that, Mr. Mario?
I mean, it's something that they're just trying to get their hands into the social network of some things. I feel like Nintendo, when it comes to their consoles, is going to really almost always be socially awkward, since it's the company that's been using friend codes for the past several generations as opposed to actual usernames. But it's something. Now, I normally don't connect that social stuff to my systems, but I know that that's going to get a lot of rotation just because there's a lot of people that are going to have Switches that will also have fun with their Facebook and Twitter accounts on there and share things and do whatever they want to.
Yeah, right now the Switch is, I would say, a little bare bones when it comes to interaction, or social interaction at least, or at least integration. Like last generation, or actually no, the Wii U would technically still be 8th gen, but the Wii U had Miiverse, which, whether you like it or not, was kind of a way you could actually friend request people. And right now, yes, Nintendo doesn't really have their own medium between friend requesting anyone. So I think this was a nice feature they added. It kind of makes me think, like, okay, they should have added this at least maybe 2.0, 3.0. Although at least it was added at some extent. But I think the real meat and potatoes will be saved till the online service launches in September. So
for sure.
And then
they're mostly going to be focusing on getting games added. Like, what I like about the Switch is I'm kind of at this point where I just don't mind not having much other stuff on there. So if I can just turn my system on and play games, that's fine. And that's what they want to focus on year one and going into year two as well, is they want to say, hey, we have a stable working system. It's obviously stable enough because it's had so many stability updates. It has a good amount of games on there, and we're going to just be adding in the other stuff as it comes. I feel like that's also been kind of demonstrated with their lack of media apps as well, too. I believe they got Hulu. They don't have Netflix or anything else, but I believe they got Hulu, and even so, they just stealth released that. They really didn't make a big fuss about it.
No, they didn't. It was strange how they did just plop down to the eShop and was like, hey guys, we're here. Where's the rest of your buddies? You know, Netflix, you know, the better stuff. YouTube.
I think they really want to focus on, let's have this be just a straight up game system. Oh yeah, you can sometimes watch videos on it, versus the other consoles out there that are trying to be all-in-one multimedia boxes, such as the Xbox One.
Mm-hmm. No, I absolutely agree with that approach. I think it's smart to do that. Definitely the opposite of what the Wii U did.
Oh yeah.
Definitely. And then, I mean, there's stuff here, like they added some new ARMS and Kirby's profile icons, which is pretty cool. They added some Pro Controller details, like they show the color of the grips now. And of course, the standard general system stability improvements to enhance the user's experience. Yeah, the update for being one revision, you know, actually the 5.0 update, seemed to not really add a whole lot in terms of like the super meaty content, but it was still nice to get some of that.
For sure.
Now, the funny part is, this update kind of reminds me, we're going to go back in time for a bit, but kind of reminds me, for those who don't know, Back in the Wii days, there was an update, version 4.2, that had this code in it that basically bricked Wiis that switched the region to Korean. Now, they were messing with the software, and people were messing with the software and OS in general, so I could understand maybe why Nintendo would include that. But the funny part is, and for some it's not even funny because it's happened to them, this update has kind of done a similar thing, except it's more out in the open. 5.0 has caused people switches who have been used with third-party docks to brick, which I mean is way more I would say serious than the Korean brick code, because at least with that people knew what the hell they were getting into. This was just out of the blue. I mean, what do you think? Do you think that's a little excessive?
So first off, I want to ask, when it came to the Korean thing, was that the original Wii that we're talking about?
It was actually, yeah, it was the original Wii, yes.
Okay, I do remember that. I remember there were even, like, Nintendo kind of went out of their way, and for a hot minute, they even explicitly, like, if you went to update your Wii, it even had a message saying, hey, just let you know, if your Wii is modded, you could brick your system from this update, so we're not going to be held responsible for this. That's not, of course, it verbatim, but I do remember that happening where they were straight up saying that their system updates could brick modified Wiis. When it comes down to something like this, yes, I do believe it is too much of an issue. The proper word's not coming to mind here. Excessive, that's it. Mm-hmm. It's too excessive, and the fallback, the official Nintendo fallback they can have is they'll say, hey, well, you were using a third-party unauthorized peripheral with your game console, and we do not authorize that, so if you bricked your system using this peripheral, we are not going to be responsible, so we're not going to replace your system. In my opinion, I don't think Nintendo's going to do that, because that would just look really bad overall, because these are not people that were trying to modify their system or crack it open or do anything else. I'm sure there were multiple people out there that just wanted a alternative dock, or they wanted a secondary dock, and it could have been cheaper, or they could have messed with it, whatever it might have been, and these are just straight up gamers that you're going to be messing with their flow on here. So I don't even think this was, part of me kind of doubts this might not have been intentional either, because something similar to this happened with the PS4 somewhat recently. Now, did you hear about that at all or not?
No, I haven't heard anything in regards to PS4 bricks.
So at one point there was a update that came out where if you had a PS4 and the disk drive was not working on it properly, the Blu-ray disk drive, not the hard disk drive, but the Blu-ray disk drive was not working properly, you could end up bricking your system from that. So people were pretty upset because some people were thinking it could have been a anti-modification measure, but then there were actually a lot of instances where people were saying, hey, my PS4, the disk drive broke over a year after I got it. I download all my games. I was fine having a broken disk drive, and now I updated my PS4 and you all bricked it. But Sony actually did come out shortly after with another update that prevented that from happening, and they did remedy that situation. Okay. So I think Nintendo's probably going to do the same thing here. I don't know if anyone's contacted them, but I don't believe Nintendo's issued a statement on this, have they?
No, there's been nothing in regards to official PR about this, and even the latest system update, I think, doesn't address the issue at all, so
I don't know what the resolution is going to be on this. I would suggest if this has happened to you, contact Nintendo, explain the situation, but just don't mention that you're using a third-party dock. Yeah, it might be a little bit of a white lie, but again, as I said, they can totally use that and just say, hey, because you're using this third-party dock, we're not going to support that.
Now, I guess we can move on from that a little bit to actually get into what this whole discussion is about, and the measures that Nintendo put in place with this new update. So, a lot of people know this, but the Switch has been hacked to hell. I think a lot of people were expecting maybe a 2-3 year break until, it was fully modified, but we're actually seeing a lot more progress than people fully realized. And Nintendo's striking back more than ever. This is the company everyone thought that modders could just walk through like nothing, like they were just thin air. But they're really getting serious. And the first sign is that they added this Okay, so I guess, would you like to explain this?
Kasler, so really the only thing I know about this is not only it sounds cool, but it's an acronym for Kernel Address Space Layout Randomization was added. And according to Switch Brew, I'm citing this on here, they're saying instead of using a hard-coded address for per CPU region, they now use x18 to point to the per CPU region. So as I'm understanding it now, I don't really come from much of a coding background. I've modified systems, of course, but coding is not really my strong suit on there. Does this almost sound like, just correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like to me that instead of course, hard coding where certain things are in memory or, in the CPU regions here, as mentioned, they're now kind of randomizing it or either encrypting it in a way.
Yeah, so basically, from what I know, and if any modders would love to correct me, you can say your criticisms in the comments below. We're fully open to corrections, of course. But the gist of it I got from it was that it was basically when you go through an entry point, you have to go through many layers, and the kernel is from what I know, the ultimate kind of goal. You want to get execution going on in the kernel. Well, what Nintendo did was they did, all right, say you want to go and get to the kernel. Well, normally in some game consoles, it's at one fixed point within the memory. Well, what they decided to do was, they decided to say, okay, it's in this part of the memory. Then 1 second later, or how long it takes, it's in this part of the memory, and then it's in this part of the memory. Basically, things are like you said, everything's randomized in memory, so that way it's harder for you to get through all of those gates. Essentially, that's the gist of it. And Nintendo did implement something similar to that in the 3DS, except I believe it was like a lower level, I guess, of code execution that they only did that for. But this is more of the higher execution level, and from what I heard, it's a lot harder to mitigate. So,
because you'd kind of have to catch it in some way. I'm thinking of this as a very basic method, so I'm trying to think in coding terms. I did a little bit of today, admittedly, but I'm just thinking in like a basic for loop, for example, where you're kind of going through it and it's saying, hey, we need to look for this value right here, so let's try 4. All right, we weren't able to find this here, it wasn't able to match up to our specifications, go in, look for 5, and we could say, hey, you need to look through addresses 4 through 10, and when you find the right one, you can then exit. So kind of what you were saying on there, as opposed to things being hard-coded where at this space, this is supposed to, like, this right here, you're supposed to attack this point, and it's going to be A second later it could be Z, a second later it could be M, whatever it's going to be. So it's neat that they tried that. I have a few, I guess, I don't have any expertise on this, I'd say, but I have a few ideas as to how this could be spearheaded later on. I don't know if you've gotten any theories on it.
I actually don't. Like I said, I'm not much into programming myself. I just love the simplified explanation that these modders bring out, and that's the gist of what I got. Basically, they're just randomizing the kernel in memory. Like, that's all they're doing. But it would be interesting to see what methods they try to like you said, spearhead that. Because they did ultimately conquer the 3DS's memory randomization for certain titles on the 3DS. So they have done that before, but I think this is kind of on a whole new level. So
it does seem like it, yes.
So I don't really know, but it's interesting to see the lengths they are going to try and prevent their console from being, hacked on newer firmwares. Because the current firmware right now that's kind of the prime target is 3.0, and that's 2 firmware revisions ago. Or at least 2 main firmware revisions ago. So if you combine go ahead.
And I know there's things, I know there's things in private that they're able to scrape and data mine everything here, so that's how we're able to get all the updates on Switch Brew. But yes, things are still aimed for 3.0.0 at the moment.
Yeah, so it'll probably be a while until we even see anything on 5.0 or 5.0.1. I'm guessing. Again, the Switch keeps on surprising me, so I don't know at this point.
I'll kind of just like shoehorn this in because the main example I'm thinking of, which we've seen before, now it wasn't kernel randomization, it wasn't as advanced as that, but back in the Xbox 360 days, what happened was at one point, so there's a file in the NAND of the system that is called day.bin, and that's a challenge file for anti-piracy. And this file stayed the same across all systems per NAND or per firmware update. So this challenge set changed every single time. So on firmware 7, you'd have a certain challenge set, and every single console on firmware 7 had the same challenge sets to pass. And then as soon as a new firmware came out, that challenge set would change. What Microsoft actually ended up doing at one point was they created random challenges across all systems. So we had never seen this before at the time, but they actually issued a silent update. So if you literally connected your Xbox to Xbox Live, you weren't prompted for an update. If you just connected on there, your console ended up absorbing this silent update, which then started to randomize the challenge. So that meant every single console past a certain firmware would have a different challenge, sometimes even on boot. It wasn't on boot, excuse me on that, but it was just every single challenge. So the way that was actually defeated was the code name was Silver Bullet, and there was a new firmware update that came out, and the person who did the reverse engineering of the drives and who also did the custom firmware for them, C Forever, he ended up making it so you could patch your games with a response file that was impervious to all challenges. So this is actually hidden in his back pocket. I don't know if they have anything in regards to this, but for a while he was saying, hey, you just have to patch your games to run on every single dashboard when there's a new update out. But then when this came out, he tested it, he saw that it worked, and this is just going to be a universal random response file that would be able to match the challenge files.
It's really funny how a lot of these modders mitigate the challenges these console companies give them. I mean, the most infamous one, and I don't want to go off topic, but I think, you know, the Dreamcast, I mean, it's kind of like that because, you know, it was had probably one of the best, you know, security out of any of the consoles in that generation, yet the mill CD format basically took that all away.
Yep. And if you ever want to throw someone off, just tell them the GD-ROM was not cracked.
I mean, yeah, that's what I originally thought when the Dreamcast was modded, but it turned out not to be the case. It was just one little loophole that Sega did eventually fix, but it's only in certain Dreamcasts. So
exactly, it's actually harder to find the fixed Dreamcast, which is a bit funny. But no, just like fun little fact right there for anybody who might be interested. You cannot, to this day, you cannot burn a GD-ROM with a standard drive, and if you do, you have to use a System Disk 2 to boot it up. Mm-hmm. So every single Dreamcast game that you're burning onto a CDR or you obtain somehow, that's a mill CD Dreamcast game that you're playing. That's not a GD-ROM. So it's a completely different format. So still, even to this day, GD-ROM has not been 100% cracked because you need to run a System Disk 2 to boot it up.
Anyways, I guess we can go back into the main Switch topic, and
sure.
we can talk about. Okay, so right now, Nintendo basically added the KASLR function in the update to mitigate modding. They also, for those who don't know, have eFuses. And what eFuses are, every time, there's these little things in the NVIDIA chip that when an update is released, in certain updates, the fuses break. And if you try to downgrade that and the fuses in the internal firmware and the fuses in the system don't line up, the Switch will literally freak out and brick. So there's basically those two mitigations of modding. But there's a third one that is not in the current Switch, but could be in future Switches, and that is a future Switch revision. Now, when we say that, we're not talking about Switch 2.0, we're not talking about Switch U, we're not talking about a successor being made 1 year after the Switch's launch. That's not gonna happen. What we're talking about is literally just a motherboard revision. I know you've talked about the Xbox 360 quite a lot on your channel, and that system has a load of motherboard revisions. So once you kind of go into detail on what they tend to fix in those, or what's changed.
Sure. So I'm just kind of attacking here just motherboard revisions in general. Normally what might happen if a system is going to have a motherboard revision, which pretty much every single console has, if I understand correctly, they'll normally do it like at the beginning. They'll have their release models and such, but then there could be two things that are, well, three things that could change this up. One of them is, of course, security. So what we're going into here, this might add in additional security. It's to be known on here. Second is also additional resources. Sometimes these new revisions will have better resources, additional ones, or even things that are going to make them more reliable. And third, I guess it would be, you know, any type of modding prevention, which that would still be in the security there. But there's a lot of times where there's been something that is explicitly utilized and exploited in a motherboard, and that is completely changed in a different revision, or when a new console revision of some kind comes out. The final thing, so I guess I lied, I'm saying 4 on here, is also just to cut costs, simply enough. A lot of times, you know, they're putting their all in at the beginning, and then after they release a system and they do 3, 4, 5 motherboard revisions, they say, you know what, for revision 6, we can make the exact same system for the end users, except we can end up producing each board like $5 cheaper if we use these different components or remove and reroute a few things.
Right, so basically what we know as, say, okay, so a good example is the PS3. There's been 3 total models that have different outer shells, but there's still additional board revisions in between each of those.
Correct.
Like one PS3, which looked like the Fat, got rid of the PS2's, I believe, CPU. And they...
Yes. Yeah, the initial PS3 literally had a physical CPU on board, and that was costing, Sony was losing money on every single initial PS3 that was released.
Right, and then they eventually just took that out, and I think they left the GPU for the PS2 in there, and then they just emulated these.
That I'm not 100% sure of. I know they did take the half step because they originally had hardware modification, like not modification, hardware backwards compatibility, where they, as I said, literally had a PS2 on board with the PS3. And then they went with PS2 software backwards compatibility for one motherboard revision, but that really wasn't high quality enough, and that was still costing them, and they just axed it, you know, by number 3.
Right. Basically, this time, it's a little different for the Switch, because this Switch's motherboard revision is most likely being made to curb modding. I believe all signs point to that, at least in the firmware. So, the next Switch revision is supposedly codenamed Moriko, and basically, the details that modders have brought up from the firmware is that the Tegra chip in the current Switch is going to be replaced with an upgraded Tegra chip. Now, when I mean upgraded, I do not mean like more CPU power or GPU power. Basically, right now, the Switch is compromised of the boot ROM. The boot ROM, for those who don't know, and again, if any modder wants to correct me, go ahead. That's perfectly fine. But from what I know, it basically like encrypts and decrypts the software and makes sure everything's legitimate. And as soon as those are compromised, you basically got access to the entire system. Well, Nintendo can mitigate that with an additional hardware revision, because they can't patch anything with the boot ROM exploit, but they can modify the hardware to do so. And that's what this data mining seems to point to. What do you think? Do you think that smart move?
Yeah, no, it is. I mean, at the end of the day, I mean, of course, there's going to be people that are on the side of the modding community and are saying, oh, no, that's BS, we need to do this. Well, I mean, Nintendo's really trying to cover their butts here. Their bread and butter is games and game consoles, and if their consoles are open to exploitation, which, as we've heard from some rumblings, according to, you know, what's out there from Fail Overflow, Team Executor, and several other teams, every single Switch right now is vulnerable to the boot ROM exploit. To Nintendo, that is not good news. So they're just trying to protect themselves at that point. I know with the Tegra, one thing I haven't looked into this as much, but I want to ask, has there been a lot of known public documentation for the alleged new Tegra chip that's supposed to be in there?
I don't. Here's what's interesting because I don't really know. If I, you know what, let me do a quick Google search. We'll do this during the discussion video of the Tegra 214. We'll do it.
Sure.
We'll do it with the Tegra.
I could even pick up a bit. The reason why I asked you that is because with the original Tegra chip that was in the Switch, a lot of people who aren't even technical or reverse engineers were kind of, looking at that with one eyebrow cocked and said, hey, that's a off-the-shelf part that's been around for a while, and, it's Tegra, it's been documented enough, so not only it's been out in the wild, people have messed around with it, but there's also been legitimately created documentation and leaked documentation and things that people have homebrewed up as well, too, where they've reversed this chipset, so even prior to the Switch coming out, it's kind of safe to say it was vulnerable at that point. And that's one of the big factors that you run into, unfortunately, if you're going to use off-the-shelf parts like that. But several people I've talked to who are quite knowledgeable in the modding scene have said that, yeah, if they didn't use that chipset, then it would have been harder to do so. But since it's so open and documented and available and transparent, it's a lot of the preliminary stepping stones are already done, and that documentation was completed.
So just to kind of give you a little sign of, I guess, the possibly the Tegra 214 being original, when I Google Tegra 210, it immediately shows up in the Wikipedia page. So it basically, says Tegra, and it shows up specifically in there. Now, if I search Tegra 214, the Wikipedia page doesn't show up, and all I get is articles talking about the data mining findings. So that could be a sign that, yes, this could be an original chip Nintendo and NVIDIA are developing to curb all of this. Again, not 100% confirmed. I mean, a Google search ain't gonna do that, especially one that's not in depth, but it's just kind of give you an idea of how well known this revision might not really be. And I guess to cap it all off, the meaning of the codename is also interesting because if I go to this link here, this is by Hex KYZ, who is a well-known reverse engineer enthusiast. Basically, the Tegra, the TK1, I don't know the actual name, the K name, was codenamed Logan. The Tegra X1 was codenamed Arista, and the Tegra 214 is codenamed Mariko, which is Wolverine's lover. And all of these codenames are based on Marvel. Which is pretty hilarious. I mean, awesome reference. I commend those chip makers. But he speculates that this could possibly symbolize Nintendo and NVIDIA's scorching romance. I mean, that's just conjecture as it is, and I find that kind of hilarious. But if
I do too. I smiled. I was like, oh, that's cute.
Yeah. But if that is the case, if that is the actual meaning, which I think that meaning could be a little bit too deep for the codename, but I mean, if you look into it with those, tinted glasses, this could be the first revision with original hardware developed by Nintendo and NVIDIA, which is actually pretty cool now that I'm thinking about it, because I think Nintendo opted to go with kind of off-the-shelf parts for the Switch because they didn't know whether it was going to be successful or not, and they really wanted to hedge their bets and just go, more open source than they have been in the past. So this is really the first time we're seeing proprietary hardware, I feel like, if this is the case.
At least for the Switch, and even so, I think this would bring, of course, a few changes to the table, maybe bump up security so we could bypass the boot ROM exploit for a bit, but the reason why they went with that too, from what I understand, and also is just mainly based on the architecture, where it's a more familiar and easier to port and work with architecture. And from what we've seen with many developers, they've been raving about how awesome the Switch is to port their games to, and how easy it's been, how it's only taken, you know, a day or two to do a basic port, and then to port their entire game, it took 2 or 3 weeks to do so. So I think that was also part of it as well. They'd heard the complaints like, hey, we don't want something super proprietary as developers. We also don't want to work on PowerPC. So either x86 or give us something that is easier or easy enough to work with.
Right. And not to mention, the next thing on this list might make developers even more happy if this turns out to be true. So another thing that was found in this update was, and again, this is kind of a little bit rocky right now. This is not like 100% concrete, because it could either go one end or another end. We'll explain that in a bit, but apparently there are random strings within the executable that could suggest a RAM bump. Basically, I think a lot of people know what RAM is. Random access memory, temporary storage for your games when you're loading a cartridge, flash storage, whatever. The original Switch has 4 gigabytes, and this basically would double, it would double the amount of RAM that's in there. Now, where it gets rocky is that Nintendo has done this before, but with the Wii U in a sense, where they did that with the dev kits. They bumped up the RAM to 8 gigabytes in later dev kit revisions, I believe. So it's not really unprecedented for them to do this for the Switch. But, I mean, what do you think if this is indeed going to be for the Switch? Do you think that this is a smart move by Nintendo? And would you be mad if they did that?
I believe that this is probably going to be for dev kits as well, too. It's not uncommon to see, so as you said, and I thank you for reminding me on this, the Switch is only 4 gigabytes. It only has 4 gigabytes of RAM, and that's common from what I've seen with many dev kits. You take the stock system, it will have however many however many megabytes or gigabytes of RAM available to it. And then for the dev kit, you end up doubling that. I think that's going to make development for it a lot easier, because what can happen is when you're porting games, working on them, they're not going to be beautiful, refined pieces of art. They're going to be messy, they're going to be buggy, they're going to have a lot of issues. So if someone is really struggling, they're like, look, I need to develop my game, I need to boil it down, optimize it, and debug it at the same time. 4 gigabytes of RAM isn't cutting it, I need 5 or 6 for a time. They're able to do that, so it's going to give developers a lot of breathing room. And then when it comes, the last few weeks of working on the game, where they have to crunch it down and really optimize it, they're going to then be aiming for that 4 gigabyte package. So I think it's going to make development much better for them. If they just somehow slap this into retail systems, and nothing else, I think that'd be silly. I think they need to do many other revisions to the system and improvements if they're going to do like a Switch 2 or Super Switch of some kind, or a Switch Pro, whatever you want to call it, so be it. We haven't really discussed that on here. But the final thing is on that too, it could also depend on the builds of the games. There's a lot, for example, I know with outside the Xbox 360 here, later revisions of the development kits had 1 gigabyte of RAM, where the retail console itself had 512. So if you're playing a game on a dev kit, some people might get excited and say, oh, I'm just going to use the 1 gigabyte of RAM on here, and I'll be able to utilize it and my game will run smoother. Not quite. That game is still coded to run at 512 megabytes of RAM. You'd have to actually go in there and adjust it so it would be able to utilize and bust through that cap of 512 and utilize however much it needs to, or cap it at 1 gigabyte. So unless they start, patching things in, doing whatever it is, kind of like what they've done for, like what Microsoft's done for the Xbox One X, or what Sony did for the PS4 Pro, I mean, that RAM upgrade could help if that implementation and such is patched in, but if they're going to do that on retail systems, they should be doing other things in conjunction with the RAM upgrade. So if they're just doubling this, and I say just, but no, if they're just going to be doubling the RAM, this is going to be more useful for developers here. So for end users, don't get excited quite yet.
No, I fully agree. I think it's kind of too soon to implement that kind of upgrade into the Switch, because we're already just 1 year in. Which, yeah, the year flew by, but it's not going to be 2-3 years yet, hopefully, but, yeah, I think, like I said, maybe 2-3 years down the line, we'll see, you know, the new Nintendo Switch, or something like that. But right now, the revisions, I think, are just going to focus on mainly optimization and security, because that's Nintendo's main problem right now. So, and plus, too, like I said, a lot of end users would be pissed. Like I said, 2-3 years down the line, we'll probably see that, maybe. Because they said they want a longer life cycle for this console than their previous consoles. They're thinking, I think Kimishima, the CEO of Nintendo, said that he would want a 10-year-esque life cycle for it, which is more than other consoles. So they would definitely have to do some revisions.
I would say with Generation 7, that kind of started becoming standard because of just the way the industry was becoming. So Sony really spearheaded that 10-year cycle. We want to support that. If Nintendo can do that as well, too, that is awesome. And then Microsoft just kind of got swept in there as well, too, because they didn't want to drop 360 immediately. So
right, makes sense.
Happens.
Yeah. But anyways, I think we can kind of point this to being dev kits. So devs can be happy, we users can be happy not to deal with other Switches having the advantage, thankfully.
Yeah,
in some way.
I think if we do see a 8GB RAM upgrade, we're also going to see a more dramatic CPU boost upgrade. I would also predict that we would get, at minimum, 4K upscaling on that as well, too. And this is just kind of a little pet project here. Nothing I'm working on, but kind of just like a pipe dream. Just have nothing but USB 3.0 port compatibility on the Switch, because I think right now, like on the dock, there's only one USB 3.0 port and the other ones are two, if I remember correctly. So that's why it's like, if it's going to go into retail systems, we're going to see a lot more than merely a RAM doubling upgrade.
Now, don't forget too that Nintendo can just update the dock if they wanted to without modifying the hardware internally. Because I think the USB 2.0 ports and the one 3.0 is just on the dock itself, and then it just connects to the USB-C port on the Switch. So they have a lot of flexibility there, whether or not they want to change things up a bit without modifying the internal hardware.
And they can do that as well too. I don't know if they change any of the like the USB throughput on there. Maybe somebody who is more knowledgeable than me can speak on that. But I feel like they would probably do like all USB 3.0 on the dock if they want to redo this and market it as a super Switch, so to speak.
Yeah, definitely. Or they could have something like when Smash Brothers comes out this holiday season, they could have a dock built in with GameCube controller ports if they wanted to.
That would be cool. That'd be cool.
Yeah, I'd definitely pay for that bundle, even though I already have a dock as it stands and a GameCube controller adapter. But I just say, you want Nintendo? That's hella cool. Just take my money.
Take it.
Just take all my rupees.
I can't believe that's coming out this year. We'll see what's up. I'm excited to try it out, but I'm just like, 2018. Wow. Oh, okay, we're getting it this year.
I think the game, and okay, we're kind of going off topic, but that's all right. Basically, it's all right. I think the game will have a form of DLC. It'll definitely will.
For sure.
Yeah. Anyways, I think I'm more interested in to see what future Switch hardware revisions they're going to do, what they're going to change inside the motherboards, because it's always interesting to see how they react to the modding community and whether they change up things, drastically, or it's just this minor tweak that can get around really easily.
Yeah, and I know with this, because we've mentioned it is a boot ROM exploit, so it's right there in the Switch code. The only way you can modify that or even, just prevent it from happening for some time is a hardware revision on there. I know with a 3DS, did you yourself follow the Sky 3DS flash card at all?
Yes, I followed that just a bit.
Okay. So the reason why I was asking about that is because I didn't really believe it until I saw it, but I spoke with someone on this who had dug up a bit more than I had on it, and he was saying that no, this is not going to get patched. This is very early on, like before the card even came out, and I was saying, well, just wait a bit, you might want to see. And he said, no, it's not going to get patched, because the way it works is that it truly emulates a actual a 3DS cartridge, and the only way that Nintendo could ever patch this thing out of existence is if they completely redo the way the 3DS handles cartridges. And you see that as true. Some people might say, oh, well, there's a lot of games that don't run on there. That's because the games were patched at a per game level. It wasn't the flash cart overall. You can take a Sky 3DS and really any of the games that came out in the first few years of the 3DS, you can load up on there, and they will load on every single 3DS revision, firmware, what have you. They're going to work on that. So that's kind of similar to what we're seeing on this end, except it's going to be just straight up internal on there. And will this patch up the boot ROM exploit? I think it will probably make it harder to access until modders find a workaround with it. But we'll just see what the future holds.
Yeah, basically, I'm expecting two scenarios to come out of this. One, it's going to take a long time. You're going to have a low firmware for the Switch to run unsigned code. Or the second alternative is the first day that system comes out, just like the new 3DS, you're going to see a pwned on the screen, and everyone's just going to be blown the fuck away, and it's like, how the hell did you do this? Did you get God's assistance? Or something like that. I mean, like I said, don't count Nintendo out, but don't count these modders out either. They will do what they can to mitigate everything Nintendo, Sony, or Microsoft throws at them. It's completely insane, so do I expect that to happen? No. But I would not be surprised if it did, so in this sense, I do think that it will be a little bit before modding starts picking up steam again, but it's pretty cool seeing how Nintendo is going about this and that they're finally catching up with what the other console manufacturers are doing in regards to security protection. The only people that haven't seemed caught up yet is NVIDIA, because they were the ones that explicitly had the documentation out for the NVIDIA Tegra chip. I think they even had the exploit in there too, in the documentation.
Now, I do have a question for you, because you followed the Wii U much closer than I did, but did the Wii U have any different motherboard revisions aside from the 8 and 32 gigabyte models?
As far as I know, I don't think so.
Okay.
I believe all of them were similar, at least. And I think that was probably for a good reason, because Nintendo probably didn't want to invest into different revisions for a system that was crashing and burning. So, yeah, I think all of them were the same, regardless. There might be some tweaks here and there, but I think they kept the same internals for each Wii U.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, I mean, when it comes to, as you were saying, putting resources towards that, the way I tell people is, look at it, the latest firmware on it was hackable for a year, and then when it got patched, they patched one exploit out of the 3 that were acquired, and it was bypassed pretty quickly. So that just showed that, within a year, they had their system fully exploited on the latest firmware and didn't care much for it while they were still patching up the 3DS.
What I love, too, is the fact that Nintendo said there was no internet browser on the Switch, yet there was WebKit still embedded in the firmware, and people figured out how to launch it, and that was the full demise of the Switch, right then and there.
And it was quite an outdated WebKit as well, too, from what I understand.
Yeah, basically, I think, I can't remember which modder, Yifan Lu or something like that, I can't remember.
Yeah.
Well-known PS Vita modder. He basically summed it up perfectly. WebKit is the bane of every single console's existence.
It truly is, especially when the thing that throws me off is it's like how your last two systems, the 3DS and the Wii U, end up getting pwned through this. So why would you include it on your Switch? And if you are going to include it, why would you include such an outdated version?
Exactly. I mean, if you're not going to care about the internet browser aspect, just don't add one. But if you care about it, at least develop it with security in mind, and apparently these console developers just like, oh look, here's some random WebKit, here you go, throw it on your console, and then wait till 2 weeks until there's some lonely modder's like, hey look, poking some code, oh my gosh, I have free games now. I mean,
and I think the worst part with this as well too is we are on update 5.0.1. We've had updates on updates, and we still don't have a properly accessible internet browser for the system, even though it's there and it's been exploited.
Exactly. Again, the irony that, oh, we don't have an internet browser, yet you guys do, technically.
Yep.
So
I know that's with the PSP, that's initially how it was found as well, and how games were initially getting dumped and how they poked around in the kernel was they found out, I think there was no internet browser for a while, but if you had the game Wipeout Pure and you went to the download section, it just took you to a really nice looking web page within a internal download, like an internal browser on the game itself. And if you did some DNS rerouting on your router, you could break out of that and utilize the internet browser several months before Sony ended up officially patching it into the PSP.
Yeah, I think that's not really going to stop, because these game companies are going to take as many shortcuts as they can, but the more shortcuts they take, the more that these modders are going to find workarounds, and these consoles will be more hackable. So if a console truly wants to be like the most hellish thing for modders, they have to pay attention to every single detail and every single line of code that they add. But
oh yeah,
virtually that's not going to be a guarantee. Everything is moddable at some point. That's basically the life lesson. If you don't want your console to be modded, just don't add WebKit. Just don't do it. Seriously.
And while we're at life lessons here, use protection.
Pretty much.
I'm just saying, I'm out here advocating for people. I want people to be safe.
Hey, yeah, especially these consoles too. You know, these consoles have to have protection, man. You know? Anyways, I guess that'll do it. So, where can they find you at, Mr. Mario?
So again, I'm pretty much Mr. Mario 2011 all over the place. Primarily on YouTube, you can find me on there, Mr. Mario 2011 or 2011. And I do a variety of different modification type videos. On there, I have, of course, tutorials ranging from older systems, such as I've done stuff on like the N64, the Super Nintendo, PlayStation 2, either trying to modify the system to, you know, do extra things or play imported games, backup games, whatever you want to say for that. And then, of course, you know, trying to pull out the best video quality I can sometimes out of those older systems, or doing any sort of repairs. So I'm always very modding-centric whenever I can be. I also do newer systems as well, too, so I have some PS4-related stuff coming down the pipeline here soon. But on top of that, I also have a couple other podcasts. One of them is Mod Chat, which has been running for several years now at this point, and that's just where myself and a co-host go over a variety of different modding related news and topics once a month. And then I also have Mario's Minute, where it's just kind of a catch it all of whatever I want to talk about, and sometimes I have a guest on that too. So all that's available. Mod Chat and Mario's Minute are on whatever podcasting platform you want to check out, and then the rest of my content is usually on YouTube. Also, you can find my Discord in any of the descriptions of my videos, so we like to have fun in the Mr. Mario 2011 Hangout server. As for any other social media, I'm available on Instagram, Twitter, where Twitter's mostly where I hang around at, and several other places. Just look me up and you can find me. But, you know, that's about all I have to plug on there. I guess I was told that I can, I could plug anything, so shout out to my dog Lily. According to the notes on here, I can also plug Stomedy, so shout out my boy Stomedy. He doesn't know me, but, you know, shout out Stomedy.
Yes.
Yeah. Shout out anyone in the Mr. Mario 2011 Discord, whatever it is. I think that's about it before I get too carried away.
Well, shout out to Simple Flips, my man. But anyways, I guess that'll do it for the discussion. I want to thank you guys for watching, and thank you, Mr. Mario, for joining.
Oh, no problem. It was really fun. Thanks for inviting me on.
Yeah, definitely. Anyways, like we said, we want to thank you guys for watching. Be sure to follow us on our social media pages, as well as our Facebook and Twitter accounts. If you want more quality content in the future, you can check out our Patreon. We have some pretty cool rewards. We have more content in the works. We also have a Discord server, so you can chat with us about Smash speculation. Everything will be linked in the description below, including Mr. Mario's social media links. Anyways, remember to return to the source, and we will see you in the next video.
Yeah.